In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where countless civilizations have risen and fallen, there exists a universal truth that even the most advanced species acknowledge with reluctant respect. Never underestimate a human's capacity for the impossible. When Corporal Sarah Chun, a battlefield medic from Earth's 7th Marine Division, found herself face-to-face with a dying Zephyrian war dragon, a creature so legendary that most aliens believe them to be myths, she had no idea that her simple act of compassion would shatter every assumption the galaxy held about humanity. What started as one medic's refusal to let a magnificent being die would ignite a chain of events that would redefine the very meaning of courage, forge the most unlikely alliance in galactic history, and prove that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in the ability to destroy, but in the determination to heal. This is the story of how a human's stubborn refusal to give up on life changed the fate of an entire war, and why the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. The plasma bombardment had turned the once lush forest of Kepler 442b into a hellscape of twisted metal and smoldering organic matter. Corporal Sarah Chun crouched behind the wreckage of what had been a Zephyrian transport, her medical kit clutched tightly against her chest as enemy fire streaked overhead in brilliant arcs of deadly light. The acrid smell of burned ozone and something far worse filled her nostrils. "Medic, we got wounded over here." The voice belonged to Private Martinez, barely audible over the constant thunder of the ongoing battle. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. Her body moving before her mind had fully processed the call. She sprinted across the crater-marked terrain, dodging debris and the occasional stray shot that came too close for comfort. The human forces have been fighting alongside the Zephyrian Republic for 3 standard months now, ever since the hegemony had declared war on both species simultaneously. It was an unlikely alliance. Humans were still considered a young species by galactic standards, barely 2 centuries into their space age, while the Zephyrians had been traversing the stars for over 5 millennia. But war had a way of making strange bedfellows, and both species found themselves united against a common enemy that sought to enslave or exterminate all free-thinking life in this sector of the galaxy. Sarah reached Martinez's position and immediately began assessing the casualties. 3 human soldiers lay scattered behind a makeshift barrier of fallen trees and debris. 2 were conscious but bleeding heavily from shrapnel wounds, while the 3rd was unconscious with what appeared to be a severe concussion. She worked quickly and efficiently, her hands moving with the practiced precision that had saved dozens of lives since the war began. "How bad is Jackson?" Martinez asked, nodding toward the unconscious soldier. "He'll live, but I need to get him back to the field hospital within the hour," Sarah replied, applying a neural stabilizer to the man's temple. "His brain activity is irregular, and there might be internal bleeding." As she worked, a sound unlike anything she had ever heard before echoed across the battlefield. It was a roar, but not the mechanical roar of engines or weapons. This was something primal, organic, filled with pain and rage and something else she couldn't quite identify. The sound sent chills down her spine and made every human and Zephyrian soldier in the immediate area pause what they were doing. "What the hell was that?" Martinez whispered. Before Sarah could answer, the ground beneath them trembled. Not the rhythmic trembling of artillery fire, but something different. Something massive was moving nearby. Through the smoke and haze, a shape began to emerge from the tree line approximately 200 meters to their northeast. At first, Sarah thought it might be a hegemony war machine she hadn't seen before. Then the smoke cleared, and she saw something that made her question her own sanity. The creature stood nearly 20 meters tall, its serpentine body covered in scales that shimmered with an iridescent blue-green hue. 6 powerful legs supported its massive frame, while 2 smaller arms ended in hands that possessed an almost human-like dexterity. But it was the head that truly marked it as something beyond ordinary comprehension, elongated and elegant with large, intelligent eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. and a maw filled with teeth designed for both cutting and crushing. "Is that?" Martinez's voice trailed off in awe. "A Zephyrian war dragon," Sarah breathed. She had heard the stories, of course. Every human in the Alliance forces had heard the legends. The Zephyrians spoke of their ancient companions with a mixture of reverence and sorrow, describing creatures of incredible intelligence and power that had once fought alongside their ancestors. But most humans assumed they were myths, stories told to boost morale or intimidate enemies. The Zephyrians themselves were humanoid reptilians, no more than 2 meters tall on average. The idea that they had once partnered with creatures like this seemed impossible. The dragon moved with obvious difficulty, its left side bearing terrible wounds that leaked a luminescent fluid Sarah assumed was blood. Scorch marks covered its flanks, and one of its wings hung at an unnatural angle. Despite its injuries, the creature moved with purpose, heading directly toward the heaviest concentration of hegemony forces. "It's going to get itself killed," Sarah said, more to herself than to Martinez. "Those wounds, it's lost too much blood. It won't last 5 minutes in active combat." "Since when do you know about dragon physiology?" Martinez asked. "I don't," Sarah admitted, "but blood loss is blood loss, regardless of species. And that thing is definitely dying." The dragon had almost reached the hegemony line when its legs buckled. The massive creature crashed to the ground with an impact that Sarah felt through the soles of her boots. For a moment, it struggled to rise, its powerful limbs pushing against the earth. Then it collapsed completely, its great head coming to rest on the scorched ground. "Sarah, we need to move," Martinez said urgently. "Command just called in an orbital strike on this sector. We have 20 minutes to get to the extraction point." But Sarah was no longer listening. She was thinking about her oath, the words she had spoken when she first became a medic. To preserve life wherever and whenever possible. To treat all wounded equally, regardless of their origin or allegiance. She had never imagined that oath would extend to a creature of legend. But as she watched the dragon's labored breathing, she knew she couldn't simply walk away. "Get Jackson and the others to the extraction point," she told Martinez, shouldering her medical kit. "I'll be right behind you." "Where are you going?" Martinez grabbed her arm. "Sarah, we don't have time for that. Creature is dying," she said firmly. "And I'm a medic. It's not human. Hell, it's barely even Zephyrian. It's just some animal." Sarah looked at him with steel in her eyes. "Have you looked into its eyes, Martinez? Really looked? That's no animal. That's someone, not something. And they need help." Before Martinez could respond, Sarah had pulled free from his grip and was running toward the fallen dragon. Behind her, she could hear Martinez cursing in both English and Spanish as he and the other soldiers began moving the wounded toward the extraction point. She knew she was probably making the worst decision of her life, but she couldn't bring herself to care. The dragon was even more massive up close. As Sarah approached, one enormous eye opened and fixed on her with startling intelligence. She could see her own reflection in the crystalline blue iris, and for a moment, she felt as though the creature was looking directly into her soul. There was no aggression in that gaze, only pain and a deep, weary sadness that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. "Hey there, big guy," Sarah said softly, the same tone she used with frightened human soldiers. "I'm here to help." The dragon's eye followed her movements as she circled around to examine its wounds. The damage was extensive. Multiple plasma burns, what appeared to be projectile wounds from some kind of kinetic weapon, and deep gashes that could only have come from the claws or teeth of another creature. But it was the wound in the creature's side that concerned her most. It was a clean puncture, probably from an energy lance, and it was bleeding heavily. Sarah opened her medical kit and began pulling out supplies. Most of her equipment was designed for human physiology, but the basics of trauma medicine were universal. Stop the bleeding, stabilize the patient, treat for shock. She had no idea if human medications would work on a dragon's metabolism, but she had to try something. As she worked, the dragon made a sound deep in its throat. Not quite a growl, not quite a purr, but something that seemed almost questioning. Sarah looked up to find both eyes now focused on her, and she could swear she saw confusion in that ancient gaze. "I know this is strange," she said, continuing to work on the wounds. "Believe me, I'm just as confused as you are. But you're hurt, and I help people who are hurt. That's what I do." The dragon's breathing was shallow and rapid, classic signs of shock and blood loss. Sarah applied pressure bandages to the worst wounds, noting with interest that the creature's blood seemed to coagulate much faster than human blood. The plasma burns were another matter entirely. She had no idea how to treat injuries caused by weapons that operated at temperatures that would instantly vaporize human flesh. "This is crazy," she muttered to herself as she worked. "I'm trying to perform first aid on a mythical creature with equipment designed for humans. This is the kind of thing that gets you discharged from mental instability." But as she continued working, something remarkable happened. The dragon began to respond to her treatments. Its breathing gradually became more regular, and the bleeding from the major wounds slowed to a trickle. More importantly, the creature seemed to understand that she was trying to help. It remained perfectly still as she worked, even when she had to probe deeper wounds to remove embedded shrapnel. Sarah had just finished applying a surgical sealant to a particularly nasty gash when she heard the familiar whine of approaching aircraft engines. She looked up to see a hegemony patrol craft cresting the nearby ridge, its weapons already charging for another strafing run. The dragon saw it too, and despite its weakened condition, it tried to rise to meet the threat. "No, stay down." Sarah pressed her hands against the dragon's massive shoulder. "You're too weak to fight." But the dragon wasn't listening. It managed to rise to its full height, swaying dangerously as it did so. The hegemony craft opened fire, and the dragon responded with something Sarah had only heard described in the most ancient Zephyrian legends. It breathed fire, not the crude, chemical combustion of human flamethrowers, but true dragon fire, a stream of plasma that seemed to burn with the intensity of a star. The hegemony craft's shields held for perhaps 3 seconds before collapsing entirely. The fighter disintegrated in a burst of superheated metal and vaporized polymer. The effort cost the dragon dearly. It collapsed again, this time harder than before, and Sarah could see that several of its wounds had reopened from the exertion. She immediately went back to work, trying to stabilize the creature before it bled to death. "That was incredibly stupid," she said as she worked. "And incredibly impressive, but still stupid. You could have killed yourself doing that." The dragon made another sound, this one definitely more like a chuckle. Sarah paused in her work and looked up at the creature's face. One eye was watching her with what she could only describe as amusement. "Did you just laugh at me?" she asked. The sound came again, and this time Sarah was certain. The dragon was laughing. Not only that, but there was something almost familiar about the way it was looking at her. An intelligence that went far beyond mere animal instinct. A new sound reached her ears, the roar of engines approaching from the south. Sarah looked up to see a formation of Zephyrian fighters approaching rapidly. For a moment, she feared they might attack, mistaking her for a threat to the dragon. Instead, the lead fighter broke formation and began circling overhead. A voice crackled through the emergency frequency on Sarah's comm unit. "Human medic, this is Flight Commander Zeth Kaler of the Zephyrian Third Wing. Status report on the Ancient One." The Ancient One? Sarah looked up at the dragon, realization beginning to dawn. "You mean this isn't just any dragon?" "Negative, medic. That is Vaskar the Eternal, last of the great war dragons and honored veteran of 1,000 battles. He has been missing for 6 standard months. We assumed he was dead." Sarah felt her mouth go dry. She wasn't just treating any dragon. She was treating a legend. A creature that was already ancient when the Zephyrian Republic was founded. A being that had fought in wars that were history before humans had even discovered fire. "He's stable for now," she reported, "but he needs immediate medical attention beyond what I can provide in the field. The wounds are severe, and he's lost a lot of blood." "Understood. Medical transport is en route." Stand by. As they waited for the medical transport to arrive, Sarah continued working on Vasker's wounds. The dragon watched her with obvious interest, and she began to get the distinct impression that he was evaluating her as much as she was treating him. There was an ancient wisdom in those eyes, a depth of experience that made her feel like a child by comparison. "How old are you?" she asked, not really expecting an answer. To her surprise, Vasker made a series of low rumbles deep in his throat. The sounds were obviously deliberate, almost like speech, but in no language Sarah recognized. "I wish I could understand you," she said. "I bet you have some incredible stories to tell." Vasker's response was interrupted by the arrival of a Zephyrian medical transport. The massive cargo vessel settled down nearby, and a team of Zephyrian medics rushed out with equipment that looked far more advanced than anything in Sarah's kit. She stepped back to give them room to work, watching as they began setting up what appeared to be a portable medical bay designed specifically for treating creatures of Vasker's size. Flight Commander Zeth Kaler approached her as the medical team took over Vasker's care. The Zephyrian was tall even by his species standards, with scales that showed the scars of many battles. His expression was difficult for Sarah to read, but she thought she detected something like gratitude. "Your actions today have been unexpected," Zeth Kaler said in accented but clear English. "Most humans would not have risked their lives for one of our ancient companions." "Most humans don't get the chance," Sarah replied. "Besides, I took an oath to preserve life. That doesn't come with species restrictions." Zeth Kaler studied her for a long moment. "The Ancient One owes you a debt. In our culture, such debts are not taken lightly." "I don't need any debt," Sarah said. "I just want him to recover." Nevertheless, the debt exists. And debts to war dragons, they have a way of changing destinies. Before Sarah could ask what he meant by that, her comm unit crackled again. It was Martinez, calling from the extraction point. "Sarah, where the hell are you? The orbital strike is coming in 15 minutes. "I have to go," Sarah told Zeth Kaler. "Will he be all right?" "Vasker has survived worse than this," the Zephyrian commander replied. "Thanks to your intervention, he will live to fight another day. And, Sarah Chun, he will remember what you did here. Dragons never forget a kindness." As Sarah ran toward the extraction point, she could hear Vasker's voice behind her, those same rumbling sounds he had made earlier. She didn't understand the words, but somehow she understood the meaning. He was saying goodbye, and somehow she knew it wouldn't be for long. The extraction ship was already lifting off when Sarah reached it, and she barely made it aboard before the orbital bombardment began. As she strapped herself into a crash seat, she looked out the port window and saw the Zephyrian medical transport disappearing into the clouds with its precious cargo. "What the hell happened out there?" Martinez asked. "You were gone for over an hour." "I was doing my job," Sarah replied simply. But as the extraction ship carried her back to the human base, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just taken a dramatic turn. She had no idea how dramatic until 3 days later, when Flight Commander Zeth Kaler arrived at the human base with a message that would change everything. Vasker the Eternal had requested her by name, and in Zephyrian culture, when a war dragon made a request, it was tantamount to a royal command. Sarah Chun was about to discover that helping a legendary creature came with consequences she had never imagined. Consequences that would lead her far from the battlefields of Kepler, 442b, and into adventures that would test everything she thought she knew about courage, friendship, and the true meaning of the alliance between humans and Zephyrians. The war was about to take a very unexpected turn. The Zephyrian flagship Eternal Flame was unlike any vessel Sarah had ever seen. Where human ships were utilitarian blocks of metal and ceramic plating, the Zephyrian vessel was a work of art. Its hull curved and flowed like a living thing, covered in scales that shifted color depending on the angle of light. As the shuttle carrying Sarah approached the docking bay, she could see patterns etched into the ship's surface that seemed to tell stories. Battles fought, worlds visited, heroes honored. "First time aboard a Zephyrian capital ship?" Flight Commander Zeth Kaler asked from the pilot's seat. "First time aboard any capital ship," Sarah admitted. I'm just a field medic. I usually travel in medical transports and landing craft. Today, you are an honored guest, Zethkayla replied. The Ancient One has been asking for you since he regained consciousness. He has refused all treatment until he could speak with you personally. Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. He's refusing treatment? But his wounds are healing remarkably well, thanks to your initial care, Zethkayla assured her. But Vasker is particular about matters of honor and debt. He will not allow our healers to complete their work until he has fulfilled his obligations to you. The shuttle settled into the docking bay with barely a whisper of contact. As they disembarked, Sarah was struck by the sheer scale of the ship's interior. The corridors were wide enough to accommodate creatures much larger than the average Zephyrian, and the ceiling soared high overhead. Everything was designed with graceful curves and flowing lines, as if the ship had been grown rather than built. How old is this ship? Sarah asked as they walked. The Eternal Flame was launched over 2,000 standard years ago, Zethkayla replied with obvious pride. She was originally built to serve as a transport and mobile command center for the War Dragons during the Hegeman Uprising. When the dragons entered their Great Sleep, she was converted to serve as our flagship. The Great Sleep? Zethkayla's expression grew somber. A tale for another time, perhaps. For now, the Ancient One awaits. They traveled through corridors that grew progressively larger until they reached a section of the ship that seemed designed for creatures of truly massive proportions. The walls here bore ancient murals depicting dragons and Zephyrians fighting side by side against various enemies. Sarah recognized some of the depicted foes from intelligence briefings, early versions of the hegemony forces, though these images showed battles that must have taken place millennia ago. Here, Zethkayla said, stopping before a massive door that could have accommodated a small spacecraft. The Ancient One waits within. The door slid open silently, revealing a vast chamber that took Sarah's breath away. The space was part medical bay, part shrine, and part something she couldn't quite identify. Gentle bioluminescent panels provided soft illumination, while the walls were covered with crystals that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. At the center of the chamber, on a platform that had obviously been designed specifically for his use, lay Vasker. The dragon looked much better than when Sarah had last seen him. His wounds had been properly treated with advanced Zephyrian medical technology, and his scales had regained much of their lustrous sheen. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. They were alert and focused, watching her approach with unmistakable intelligence. "Hello again," Sarah said, feeling somewhat awkward. "I'm glad to see you're feeling better." Vasker rumbled in response, the sound deeper and more resonant in the enclosed space. Then, to Sarah's amazement, he began to speak. The words were in no language she recognized, but there was a musical quality to them that made her think of ancient songs and half-remembered dreams. The dragon's voice was surprisingly melodious for something so large, each syllable carefully articulated and filled with meaning she couldn't quite grasp. "He says he is honored by your presence," Zethkayla translated. "He wishes to thank you for your courage and compassion in treating his wounds, and to formally acknowledge the debt he owes you." Sarah looked between the dragon and the translator, feeling increasingly out of her depth. "Please tell him that no debt is necessary. I was just doing my job," Zethkayla translated, and Vasker responded with what sounded like amusement. The flight commander's expression grew somewhat strained. "He says that humility is an admirable trait in a warrior, but that some debts transcend personal preference. He has lived for over 4,000 standard years, and in all that time, only a handful of individuals have risked their lives to preserve his. None of them were human." Vasker spoke again, his tone growing more serious. Zethkayla listened intently, then turned to Sarah with an expression she couldn't quite read. "The Ancient One wishes to know if you understand what it means for a human to be acknowledged by a war dragon." "I assume it's an honor," Sarah said carefully. "More than that," Zethkayla replied. "According to our most ancient traditions, A life debt to a war dragon can only be repaid through partnership. Vasker is offering to accept you as his bonded companion. Sarah felt the words hit her like a physical blow. His what? A dragon rider, Zeth Kaler explained. The highest honor our culture can bestow. In the old days, only the greatest warriors and wisest leaders were chosen to partner with the war dragons. The bond is for life, and it grants both partners abilities beyond what either could achieve alone. Sarah looked up at Vasker, who was watching her with obvious expectation. I don't understand. I'm not a warrior. I'm a medic. Vasker spoke again, and this time Zeth Kaler smiled as he translated. He says that the greatest warriors are often those who fight to preserve life, rather than take it. He has observed your actions on the battlefield, Sarah Chun. You have run into enemy fire to save wounded soldiers on 17 separate occasions. You have performed surgery under bombardment. You have risked your life for others more times than most soldiers see combat. That's different, Sarah protested. That's medical care, not warfare. Is it? Zeth Kaler asked. When you ran across that battlefield to treat Vasker, were you not fighting against death itself? When you work to save lives while under fire, are you not battling the very forces that seek to destroy your companions? Vasker rumbled again, and Zeth Kaler nodded. He says that true courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. He has seen you demonstrate such courage repeatedly. That is why he chooses you. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the enormity of what was being offered. What would this partnership entail? I mean, practically speaking, you would learn to fight alongside him, Zeth Kaler explained. The bond between dragon and rider is both physical and mental. You would share thoughts, emotions, and in battle, you would become a single entity with a single purpose. Together, you would be capable of feats that would seem impossible to others. But I don't know anything about riding dragons, Sarah said. I've never even ridden a horse. Vasker made a sound that was unmistakably laughter. When he spoke, his tone was gentle, almost paternal. He says that knowledge can be learned, Zeth Kaler translated. But courage and compassion cannot be taught. Those you already possess in abundance. Sarah looked around the vast chamber, taking in the murals and crystals, the advanced medical equipment, and the obvious reverence with which everything had been arranged. This was clearly a place of great significance, and she was being offered something that probably hadn't been given to anyone in centuries. What about my duties as a medic? She asked. I can't abandon my responsibilities to the human forces. On the contrary, Zeth Kaler said, a Dragon Rider medic would be invaluable to both our peoples. Vasker could transport you to any battlefield instantly, provide protection while you work, and even assist in evacuating large numbers of wounded. Your effectiveness would increase exponentially. Vasker spoke again, his voice carrying a note of what Sarah interpreted as hope. He says that the choice is yours, Zeth Kaler translated. But he believes that together, you could save far more lives than either of you could apart. He offers not just partnership, but friendship. Dragons, he says, are loyal for eternity. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to process everything she was hearing. 3 days ago, she had been a simple field medic doing her job on a backwater planet. Now she was being offered a chance to partner with a creature of legend, to become something that existed only in ancient stories and cultural myths. If I agree, she said slowly, what happens next? The bonding ceremony, Zeth Kaler replied. It is ancient and sacred, performed in the presence of the greatest treasures of our people. The process itself is not painful, but it is profound. Once completed, the bond cannot be broken except by death. That's a pretty serious commitment. Yes, Zeth Kaler agreed, which is why Vasker has chosen carefully. He could have selected any warrior in our fleet, any pilot or commander. He chose you because he believes you possess qualities that cannot be found in others. Sarah opened her eyes and looked up at Vasker. The ancient dragon was watching her with infinite patience, but she could see something in his expression that reminded her of every wounded soldier she had ever treated. Hope mixed with vulnerability, the quiet desperation of someone who needed help but was too proud to ask directly. "You really want this, don't you?" she asked the dragon directly. Vasker's response was soft, almost a whisper, but filled with such longing that Sarah felt it in her chest. She didn't need Zeth Kaler's translation to understand the meaning. "He says he has been alone for a very long time," Zeth Kaler said quietly. "The last of his kind, fighting battles that his brothers and sisters will never see. He had accepted that he would die alone, forgotten by a galaxy that had moved beyond the need for dragons. Your kindness showed him that perhaps there was still a place for him, still someone who could see value in an old warrior." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. She thought about her oath as a medic, her promise to preserve life, and ease suffering wherever she found it. Looking at Vasker, she could see that his deepest wounds were not physical. They were the scars of loneliness and the pain of being the last of his kind. "If we do this," she said, "we do it right. I want to learn everything, your history, your culture, the proper protocols. I won't dishonor the tradition through ignorance." Vasker's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. He raised his great head and let out a sound that was part roar, part song, echoing through the chamber with such power that Sarah could feel it resonating in her bones. It was a sound of pure joy, of hope renewed, of a soul that had thought itself forever alone suddenly, finding companionship. "He accepts," Zeth Kaler said unnecessarily, his own voice thick with emotion. "The bonding ceremony will take place tomorrow at the rising of this system star. Tonight, you will be instructed in the ancient ways, so that you may approach the ritual with proper understanding and respect." As if summoned by some unseen signal, several other Zephyrians entered the chamber. Sarah recognized them as high-ranking officers and officials, their scales bearing the intricate markings that denoted their positions. Among them was an elderly female whose scales had taken on an almost silver hue with age. "This is Elder Sashta," Zeth Kaler introduced. "She is the keeper of our oldest traditions and will prepare you for tomorrow's ceremony." Elder Sashta approached Sarah with measured steps, her ancient eyes studying the human with obvious interest. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries. "So," the elder said in accented but precise English, "you are the human who would bond with the last dragon. Tell me, young one, do you truly understand what you are accepting?" "I'm not sure anyone could fully understand something like this beforehand," Sarah replied honestly. "But I know that Vasker saved my life and the lives of my comrades when he destroyed that hegemony fighter. I know that he's been fighting this war longer than my species has had spaceflight. And I know that he's lonely, and that loneliness is a kind of wound that never heals on its own." Elder Sashta studied her for a long moment, then smiled, the first genuine Zephyrian smile Sarah had ever seen. "You will do," the elder said simply. "Kulme, we have much to discuss and little time to prepare." As Sarah was led away to begin her crash course in dragon lore and bonding rituals, she looked back at Vasker one more time. The ancient dragon was watching her go with something that looked remarkably like pride in his eyes. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of intensive instruction. Sarah learned about the history of the war dragons, their role in Zephyrian society, and the sacred nature of the bond between dragon and rider. She discovered that the partnership was more than just practical. It was spiritual, emotional, and in some ways that defied scientific explanation, physical as well. The dragons, Elder Sashta explained, were not just intelligent animals. They were beings of immense psychic power, capable of sharing thoughts and emotions with their bonded partners. The bond would allow Sarah to sense Vasker's thoughts and feelings, and he would sense hers. In battle, they would fight with perfect coordination, each anticipating the other's actions. But the bond came with responsibilities as well. A dragon rider was expected to understand and respect the ancient ways, to act as an ambassador between their people and the dragons, and to accept that their life was now inextricably linked with that of their partner. Where one went, the other would follow. What one experienced, the other would share. "Are you certain you're ready for this?" Elder Sashta asked as the ceremony approached. Once the bond is formed, there could be no going back. Sarah thought about everything she had learned, everything she was giving up, and everything she was gaining. "I'm ready," she said firmly. The bonding ceremony took place in the ship's most sacred chamber, a vast space at the very heart of the eternal flame. The walls were covered with crystals that had been harvested from the dragon's homeworld before its destruction millennia ago, and they pulsed with soft light that seemed to respond to emotion and thought. Vasker was waiting for her in the center of the chamber, and for the first time since she had met him, Sarah could see him at his full, magnificent glory. His wounds had healed completely, his scales gleamed like polished metal, and his eyes burned with an inner fire that spoke of immense power held in perfect control. The ceremony itself was surprisingly simple. Sarah placed her hand on Vasker's forehead, while Elder Sashta spoke words in an ancient dialect that predated the current Zephyrian language. The crystals around them began to glow brighter, and Sarah felt something warm spreading through her mind. At first, it was just a gentle presence, like the feeling of someone standing close behind her. Then it grew stronger, and she began to sense emotions that were not her own. Ancient memories, deep wisdom, and a profound sense of relief and joy at no longer being alone. Then she heard it, Vasker's voice, not spoken aloud, but communicated directly into her mind. The words came not in any language she knew, but in pure meaning that her brain somehow interpreted as speech. "Welcome, my friend," the dragon said. "We are one now in mind and purpose. Your courage has given me hope, and my strength shall be your shield. Together, we will face whatever comes." Sarah felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she responded, not with words, but with the pure emotion of acceptance and friendship. The bond settled into place like a puzzle piece finding its proper fit, and suddenly she could sense everything about Vasker's thoughts, his memories, his vast intelligence, and his deep, abiding loneliness that was finally being healed. "How do you feel?" Elder Sashta asked as the ceremony concluded. Sarah looked up at Vasker, who was watching her with eyes that now seemed to hold a piece of her own soul. "Different," she said honestly, "like I'm more than I was before." "You are," the elder confirmed. "You are Dragon Rider Sarah Chun, partner to Vasker the Eternal, guardian of the ancient ways, and protector of all who fight for freedom. The galaxy will remember this day." As the assembled Zephyrians offered their congratulations and blessings, Sarah realized that her life as a simple field medic was truly over. What came next, she couldn't say. But as she felt Vasker's contentment and joy flowing through their new bond, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the greatest partner anyone could ask for. The war was about to discover what a human medic and an ancient dragon could accomplish together. 3 weeks after the bonding ceremony, Sarah stood on the observation deck of the Eternal Flame, watching the stars wheel by as the ship traveled through hyperspace toward their next assignment. The bond with Vasker had grown stronger with each passing day, and she was beginning to understand the true scope of what she had accepted. Through their mental link, she could feel Vasker's presence constantly, not intrusively, but like a warm presence in the back of her mind. His memories occasionally surfaced in her dreams, giving her glimpses of battles fought millennia ago, of worlds that no longer existed, and of companions long since turned to dust. In return, he seemed fascinated by her own memories of Earth, of human medicine, and of the simple pleasures of mortal life that his ancient existence had almost forgotten. "You're learning quickly," Elder Sashta observed, joining Sarah at the observation window. "Most new riders require months to achieve the level of synchronization you've reached in weeks." "Vasker is a good teacher," Sarah replied, "and patient. He's helping me understand things I never would have imagined possible." Through their bond, She felt Vasker's amusement at her words. The dragon was resting in his chamber several decks below, but their connection allowed them to communicate across any distance. His voice whispered in her mind with warm affection. You give yourself too little credit, my friend. Your mind adapts to new concepts with remarkable speed. Perhaps this is another gift of your species. Sarah smiled at the compliment. The bond had revealed much about both of them. Vasker's mind was vast and layered with millennia of experience, but underneath all that ancient wisdom was a core of warmth and humor that delighted in new experiences. He found her human perspective refreshing, while she marveled at the depth of knowledge and understanding that came with his age. Elder Sashta, Sarah said, I've been reading about the history of the war dragons, but there are gaps in the records. What happened to the others? Why is Vasker the last? The elder's expression grew somber. A tale of loss that spans centuries, young writer. The dragons were not destroyed by any single catastrophe, but rather by the slow march of time and changing circumstances. Sashta gestured toward the stars beyond the observation window. In the ancient days, our people faced threats that required the power of dragons to overcome. Massive space-dwelling creatures that devoured entire fleets, artificial intelligences that sought to convert all organic life into mechanical servants, empires that commanded the forces of collapsed stars. The dragons were our answer to the impossible. But such threats became rarer as the galaxy grew more civilized, Sarah said, understanding beginning to dawn. Precisely. As technology advanced and diplomatic solutions became more common, the need for dragon-level power decreased. Many dragons chose to enter the Great Sleep, believing they would be awakened when the galaxy needed them again. Others departed for the void between galaxies, seeking new challenges among distant stars. And Vasker chose to remain active, believing that duty demanded vigilance even in peaceful times. He was not wrong. The hegemony's rise proved that the galaxy still harbored threats that required the old ways to defeat. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent chime from the ship's communication system. Flight Commander Zethkaler's voice echoed through the corridor. All senior staff to the command center immediately. Priority 1 alert. Sarah and Elder Sashta exchanged glances before hurrying toward the command center. Through her bond, Sarah felt Vasker's attention focusing sharply on the situation. The dragon was already rising from his rest, his massive form moving through the ship's corridors with practiced ease. The command center was a hive of activity when they arrived. Multiple displays showed tactical information, and the tension in the room was palpable. Zethkaler stood at the center of it all, his scaled features grim with concern. Report, Elder Sashta commanded. We've received a distress call from a human colony world of Haven's Rest, Zethkaler replied. The hegemony has launched a major offensive against the planet. Initial reports indicate they're using a new type of weapon, something that's causing massive casualties even among fortified positions. Sarah felt her blood run cold. Haven's Rest was home to nearly 2 million human civilians, as well as the largest joint human-Zephyrian medical facility in this sector. What kind of weapon? Unknown, Zethkaler admitted. But preliminary reports suggest it's some form of energy weapon that can penetrate standard shielding. The Colonial Defense Forces are requesting immediate assistance. How long until we reach the system? Sarah asked. At maximum hyperspace velocity, 18 hours, came the reply. Through her bond, Sarah felt Vasker's presence grow stronger as the ancient dragon entered the command center. Even though he had to remain in the corridors due to his size, his voice carried clearly through the mental link they shared. The young human speaks truly. Vasker's mental voice was grim. I can sense the fear of those under attack. Their terror carries across the void like a scream. Sarah had learned that Vasker's psychic abilities extended far beyond their personal bond. The dragon could sense strong emotions across vast distances, particularly fear and pain. It was both a gift and a curse. He was often aware of suffering he was too far away to prevent. We need to get there faster, Sarah said aloud. 18 hours might be too late. Impossible jusqu'à rapide. The eternal flame is already operating at maximum safe velocity. To push harder would risk damaging the hyperdrive. There is another way, Vasker's voice echoed in Sarah's mind, and through their bond she caught glimpses of memories. Dragons flying through hyperspace itself, navigating the void between stars with only their natural abilities. Vasker says he can get us there faster, Sarah announced. He could travel through hyperspace without a ship. The command center fell silent. Elder Sashta was the first to speak. That is theoretically possible. The ancient texts speak of dragons who could traverse the void itself. But it has not been attempted in over 1,000 years. How much faster? Zeth Kaler asked. Through their bond, Sarah could feel Vasker calculating distances and energies. 6 hours, she replied. Maybe less. The risk would be enormous, Elder Sashta warned. Hyperspace is hostile to organic life. Even dragons are not immune to its effects during extended exposure. But Vasker wouldn't be alone, Sarah realized. He'd have me. The bond works both ways. I can help anchor him to normal space, provide a connection to prevent him from being lost in the void. You're talking about riding a dragon through hyperspace, Zeth Kaler said incredulously. No one has ever survived such a journey. No one has ever been bonded to a dragon during such a journey, Sarah corrected. The partnership changes things. Through their bond, she felt Vasker's approval of her reasoning, along with his determination to attempt the journey regardless of the risks. His thoughts carried images of the people they might save, the lives that would be lost if they arrived too late. I need medical supplies, Sarah said decisively. Enough to establish field hospitals and treat mass casualties. And I need them configured for both human and Zephyrian physiology. Sarah, Elder Sashta said gently, what you're proposing is incredibly dangerous. The bond between you and Vasker is still new, untested in extreme conditions. The stress of hyperspace travel could sever it permanently, or worse. Then will be the test, Sarah replied. Those people on Haven's Rest don't have time for us to play it safe. She could feel Vasker's pride in her decision, along with his own fierce determination. The dragon had spent millennia protecting others. The thought of standing by while innocents suffered was anathema to his nature. Very well, Zeth Kaler said after a moment's consideration. We'll prepare the medical supplies and configure them for rapid deployment. But, Sarah, if something goes wrong in hyperspace, there will be no way to rescue you. Understand, Sarah said. But this is what we trained for. This is why we bonded, to do things that neither of us could do alone. The next 2 hours were a blur of preparation. Medical supplies were loaded into specialized containers designed for rapid deployment. Sarah donned a modified EVA suit that would protect her during the transition into hyperspace, while Vasker prepared himself mentally for the journey ahead. As they prepared to depart, Elder Sashta pulled Sarah aside for a final conversation. There are things you should know about hyperspace travel, the Elder said quietly. The void between dimensions is not empty. It contains entities that exist outside normal reality. They are drawn to consciousness, particularly strong emotions like fear or pain. What kind of entities? No one knows for certain. The ancient texts describe them as shadows of things that never were, echoes of possibilities that never came to pass. They are not evil in any sense we understand, but they are alien beyond comprehension. Some writers who attempted void travel reported seeing impossible things, cities that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, creatures made of living mathematics, seas of crystallized time. How do I protect myself against them? Focus on your bond with Vasker, Elder Sashta advised. The connection between dragon and rider creates a kind of beacon of reality that can guide you safely through the void. But, Sarah, if you see anything that seems wrong, anything that makes you question what is real, trust the bond above all else. An hour later, Sarah stood in the Eternal Flames launch bay, looking up at Vasker's magnificent form. The dragon had assumed a position that would allow her to ride between his shoulders, where specialized saddles and restraints had been hastily installed. Medical supply containers were secured along his flanks, their contents organized for rapid deployment upon arrival. "Are you ready, my friend?" Vasker's mental voice carried a mixture of excitement and concern. "As ready as anyone can be for something like this," Sarah replied, climbing onto his back and securing herself in the riding harness. The sensation of being so high above the deck was dizzying, but she could feel Vasker's strength and stability through their bond. "Launch bay depressurizing," came the announcement from the control center. "Dragon Rider, you are cleared for departure." The massive launch bay doors opened, revealing the swirling energies of hyperspace beyond. Sarah had never seen hyperspace from outside a ship's protective hull, and the sight was both beautiful and terrifying. Streams of energy twisted and flowed like cosmic rivers, while strange lights pulsed in patterns that seemed almost alive. "Hold tight," Vasker advised through their bond. "The transition may be intense." The dragon launched himself in the launch bay with powerful thrusts of his wings. For a moment, they hung suspended in the void. Then, Vasker drew upon abilities that had been dormant for centuries. Sarah felt power flowing through their bond as the dragon began to navigate the currents of hyperspace directly. The sensation was indescribable. Through her EVA suit's visor, Sarah watched reality twist and flow around them. Stars became streams of light. Space itself seemed to bend and fold, and she caught glimpses of things that her mind struggled to process. Geometric shapes that existed in too many dimensions, creatures made of pure thought, structures that seemed to be built from crystallized mathematics. "Do not look too closely at the impossible things," Vasker warned through their bond. "Focus on me, on our destination, on the people we seek to save." Sarah forced her attention to their mental connection, using it as an anchor against the strangeness surrounding them. Through the bond, she could feel Vasker navigating by instincts older than civilization, following currents of force that existed beyond the normal universe. Time became meaningless in hyperspace. Sarah couldn't tell if they had been traveling for minutes or hours when she began to sense something else in the void, a presence that felt vast and alien, nothing like the warm intelligence of Vasker. "Something's watching us," she said through the bond. "I feel it too," Vasker replied. "The entities Elder Sashta warned you about. They are curious about our bond. It is something they have not encountered before." Through the strange light of hyperspace, Sarah caught glimpses of shapes moving in the distance. They didn't seem hostile, merely interested, but there was something about them that made her skin crawl. They moved in ways that defied physics, appeared to exist in multiple locations simultaneously, and left trails of distorted space in their wake. "Are we in danger?" Sarah asked. "Not if we maintain our focus," Vasker assured her. "They feed on confusion and lost purpose. As long as we know who we are and where we are going, they cannot touch us." To reinforce their connection, Vasker began sharing memories through their bond. Images of people they had saved, battles fought for noble causes, the joy of helping others. Sarah responded by focusing on her own memories of healing, of lives preserved through medical intervention, of the oath she had taken to protect and serve. The alien presences seemed to lose interest as their purpose became clearer, fading back into the chaotic energies of hyperspace. Sarah felt a surge of relief, followed by growing excitement as she began to sense their destination approaching. "Haven's Rest System," Vasker announced. "Prepare for transition back to normal space." The return to normal space was jarring after the fluid reality of hyperspace. Suddenly, they were flying through vacuum again, with stars that held steady positions and space that behaved according to familiar physics. But the relief of reaching their destination was quickly overshadowed by the sight that greeted them. Haven's Rest hung in space ahead of them, its surface scarred by bombardment. Massive fires burned across several continents, while debris from destroyed orbital platforms drifted through the system like a graveyard of metal and plastic. Even from this distance, Sarah could see that the planet's defenses had been overwhelmed. "We made it," she said through the bond. "Now let's see what we could do to help." Vasker's response carried grim determination. "The real test begins now, my friend. Let us show this galaxy what a human medic and an ancient dragon can accomplish together." As they accelerated toward the besieged planet, Sarah began scanning comm frequencies for distress calls and casualty reports. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of thousands wounded, medical facilities destroyed or overwhelmed, evacuation routes cut off by continued hegemony attacks. But through her bond with Vasker, Sarah felt something she hadn't expected: hope. They had accomplished the impossible just by getting here, crossing the galaxy in hours instead of days. If they could do that, what else might be possible? The true test of their partnership was about to begin, and the fate of Haven's Rest hung in the balance. The surface of Haven's Rest was a war zone unlike anything Sarah had ever witnessed. As Vasker descended through the planet's atmosphere, she could see the devastating effects of the hegemony's new weapon. Entire city blocks had been reduced to glass and twisted metal, while the very ground seemed to have been melted and reformed into unnatural shapes. The weapon wasn't just destroying buildings. It was fundamentally altering matter at the molecular level. By the ancient stars, Vasker's mental voice carried horror and anger in equal measure. What manner of abomination could cause such devastation? Through their bond, Sarah felt the dragon's rage building. A terrible, ancient fury that spoke of battles fought against forces that sought to unmake the very fabric of existence. But underneath the anger, she sensed something else: determination and hope. They were here now, and together they could make a difference. "Take us to the largest concentration of survivors," Sarah said through their mental link. "We'll establish a field hospital and work our way out from there." Vasker's enhanced senses could detect life signs across vast distances, and he guided them toward what had once been the planet's capital city. The scene that greeted them as they landed in the city's central plaza was heartbreaking. Thousands of wounded lay scattered across the open space, while overwhelmed medical personnel struggled to treat injuries they had never seen before. The moment Vasker touched down, his massive presence caused a stir among the survivors. Some scattered in fear, having never seen a war dragon before, while others simply stared in awe. But it was the wounded who caught Sarah's attention. Humans and Zephyrians alike, their injuries unlike anything she had encountered in her medical training. "Sarah," a familiar voice called out across the plaza. She turned to see Dr. Marcus Webb, her former supervisor from the 7th Marine Division's Medical Corps, running toward them. His uniform was torn and blood-stained, and exhaustion was written across his features. "Marcus, thank God you're alive," Sarah said, dismounting from Vasker with practiced ease. "What's the situation?" "Catastrophic," Dr. Webb replied grimly. "The hegemony hit us with something new, some kind of molecular disruptor that doesn't just wound, it transforms. Look at this." He led her to a nearby casualty, a young Zephyrian whose arm had been caught in the edge of a weapon blast. Where the energy had struck, the flesh and bone had been transformed into a crystalline structure that pulsed with its own inner light. The victim was conscious but in obvious pain, and conventional medical scanners couldn't even identify what the affected tissue had become. "We've seen this pattern across hundreds of casualties," Dr. Webb explained. "The weapon doesn't just destroy, it converts organic matter into some kind of exotic material. We can't treat it with conventional medicine because we don't understand what it's become." Sarah knelt beside the wounded Zephyrian, her mind racing. Through her bond with Vasker, she could feel the dragon's ancient wisdom focusing on the problem. His knowledge spanned millennia, including encounters with weapons and technologies that no longer existed. "I have seen something like this before." Vasker's mental voice carried the weight of terrible memory. "During the War of Unmaking 3,000 years ago, an empire that sought to transform all matter into a controllable substrate for their own purposes. How was it stopped? Sarah asked through their bond. With great sacrifice, Vasker replied. But the key was understanding that the transformation process was not permanent. It could be reversed with the right combination of energies and biological catalysts. Sarah looked up at Dr. Webb. I need a complete medical scanner, a field surgical kit, and access to any Zephyr medical equipment you might have. Vasker thinks we can reverse this. Vasker? Dr. Webb looked confused for a moment. Then his eyes widened as he fully registered the massive dragon looming over them. You mean the dragon? Sarah, what the hell happened to you? Long story, Sarah replied, already moving toward the medical supplies that had been deployed from their rapid transit containers. Short version, we're bonded partners now, and his knowledge might be the key to saving these people. As Sarah worked, she felt Vasker's consciousness merging more fully with her own. The dragon's vast knowledge of biology, energy manipulation, and exotic matter states flowed through their bond, giving her insights that no human medical training could provide. She began to understand the transformation process, how the hegemony weapon worked, why it caused such devastating effects, and, most importantly, how it might be reversed. The crystalline transformation follows specific patterns, she explained to Dr. Webb as she worked. It's not random. It's converting organic compounds into a stable but alien molecular structure. If we can introduce the right counterfrequency, we should be able to revert the matter back to its original state. Counterfrequency? Sarah, that's not medicine. That's theoretical physics. Today, they're the same thing, Sarah replied, drawing on Vasker's knowledge to configure her medical equipment in ways its designers never intended. Vasker, I need you to generate a specific resonance frequency through our physical contact. Can you do that? I can, the dragon replied. But the process will require precise coordination between us. Your human medical knowledge combined with my understanding of energy manipulation. Sarah placed her hands on the crystalline growth affecting the Zephyrian patient, while Vasker extended one massive claw to make contact with her shoulder. Through their bond, she felt power flowing. Not the destructive force she had seen Vasker use in combat, but something more subtle and controlled. The dragon was generating specific frequencies, modulating them according to her medical assessment of the patient's condition. The crystalline tissue began to glow brighter, then suddenly started to shift and flow like liquid. Within moments, it had reformed into normal flesh and bone, completely restored to its original state. The Zephyrian patient sat up with a gasp of surprise, flexing his previously transformed arm with obvious relief. Incredible, Dr. Webb breathed. How is this possible? Partnership, Sarah replied simply. Vasker's knowledge and my medical training working together to accomplish something neither of us could do alone. Word of the successful treatment spread quickly through the plaza. Within minutes, Sarah found herself at the center of a growing crowd of medical personnel and wounded civilians, all desperate for help. The scope of the task ahead was daunting. Hundreds of transformation casualties, and more arriving as evacuation craft brought survivors from outlying areas. We need to establish a proper treatment protocol, Sarah said through her bond with Vasker. Something that can be replicated by other medical teams. Agreed, the dragon replied. But first, we must address a more immediate concern. My senses detect large numbers of hostile forces approaching from the north. The hegemony is not finished with this world. Sarah looked up to see contrails streaking across the sky, enemy aircraft moving toward their position. The evacuation site will be a prime target for the hegemony forces, and thousands of wounded civilians will be helpless if the enemy decided to finish what they had started. We need air cover, Dr. Webb said, following her gaze. But our defense forces were wiped out in the initial attack. Through their bond, Sarah felt Vasker's battle rage stirring. The dragon had remained relatively calm while they worked on medical treatment, but the threat to helpless civilians awakened something primal and terrible in his ancient soul. Vasker will handle the air defense, Sarah said with quiet confidence. But I need to keep treating patients. Can you manage that? I have fought worse odds, my friend, Vasker replied through their mental link. Protect the wounded, I will protect all of you. The dragon launched himself skyward with a roar that shook the ground beneath them. Sarah watched for a moment as Vasker's massive form streaked toward the approaching enemy formation, then forced herself to focus on the next patient requiring treatment. What followed was a battle unlike anything in recorded history. Vasker engaged the enemy aircraft with techniques that combined ancient dragon combat methods with knowledge gained from fighting alongside modern forces. His natural abilities, flight, armor-like scales, and devastating plasma breath, were enhanced by millennia of tactical experience and an understanding of contemporary warfare. But it wasn't just Vasker fighting alone. Through their bond, Sarah found that she could assist even while treating patients on the ground. Her human intuition and pattern recognition, combined with her growing familiarity with modern hegemony tactics, allowed her to provide tactical advice and early warning of enemy movements. In return, Vasker's enhanced senses gave her awareness of threats and opportunities across the entire battlefield. Incoming missile lock from your 6 o'clock, Sarah warned through their bond while simultaneously treating a patient with extensive transformation injuries. Confirmed, Vasker replied. Evasive maneuvers initiated. The dragon rolled through a complex aerial maneuver that should have been impossible for something of his size, avoiding the missile and positioning himself for a devastating counterattack. His plasma breath lanced out, disintegrating 3 enemy fighters in a single blast. On the ground, Sarah worked with desperate efficiency to treat as many transformation casualties as possible. With each successful reversal, she and Vasker refined their technique, developing protocols that could be taught to other medical teams. Dr. Webb and his staff watched in amazement as patients who had been written off as untreatable were restored to perfect health. We need to document this procedure, Dr. Webb said as he assisted with patient preparation. If the hegemony is using this weapon on other worlds, this treatment protocol could save millions of lives. Already working on it, Sarah replied, her hands glowing with the subtle energies that Vasker was channeling through their bond. But we need to survive the next hour first. The battle overhead was intensifying. More hegemony forces had arrived, including heavy cruisers that began bombarding the planet's surface from orbit. Vasker was holding his own against the fighters, but the capital ships posed a threat he couldn't address alone. Sarah, his mental voice carried urgent concern. Orbital bombardment is imminent. The enemy ships are charging their main weapons. Sarah looked up at the sky, where she could see flashes of light that indicated massive energy weapons being prepared for firing. If those orbital bombardments reached the surface, everyone in the plaza would be vaporized instantly. Can you reach them? She asked through their bond. Not at this distance, but there may be another way. Through their connection, Sarah felt Vasker accessing memories that were ancient even by his standards, techniques used by dragons during the legendary wars of the distant past. What do you need from me? Your trust, Vasker replied, and your willingness to attempt something that has never been tried before. Sarah didn't hesitate. Do it. What happened next would be talked about for generations. Through their bond, Sarah felt Vasker drawing on not just his own power, but the combined strength of their partnership. The dragon began to generate energy on a scale that defied comprehension. Not the focused plasma breath he used for aerial combat, but something far more massive and controlled. The air around the plaza began to shimmer as Vasker created what could only be described as a localized energy field, a defensive barrier that would protect the wounded and medical personnel from orbital bombardment. But maintaining such a field required more power than even an ancient dragon could generate alone. Through their bond, Sarah felt herself becoming part of the process. Her human life force, combined with her medical knowledge and her deep understanding of biological systems, somehow augmented Vasker's natural abilities. Together, they created something unprecedented, a fusion of human and dragon capabilities that transcended what either species could accomplish individually. The orbital bombardment struck the energy field with devastating force. The plaza was illuminated with light that would have been blinding if not for the field's protective properties. For several terrifying seconds, it seemed as though the barrier might fail under the assault. Then the bombardment ended, and the field held firm. "Impossible," Dr. Webb whispered, staring up at the translucent dome of energy that covered the entire plaza. No single creature could generate that much power. "Vasker isn't alone," Sarah said, her voice carrying new confidence. "And neither am I." The demonstration of power had an immediate effect on the battle overhead. The hegemony forces, faced with a defensive capability they couldn't understand or counter, began to withdraw. Vasker used their retreat to devastating effect, pursuing the enemy ships and systematically destroying any that moved too slowly. Within an hour, the skies over Haven's Rest were clear of enemy forces. Vasker returned to the plaza with obvious exhaustion, his massive form settling down near the field hospital that Sarah had established. Through their bond, she could feel his weariness, but also his deep satisfaction at having protected so many lives. "Status report," Sarah said through their mental link as she continued treating patients. "All immediate threats neutralized," Vasker replied. "But more enemy forces will come. This world will need continued protection. Then we'll provide it," Sarah said firmly. "We'll establish a permanent medical facility here, train local personnel in the transformation reversal technique, and make sure Haven's Rest has the defenses it needs." Over the following days, Sarah and Vasker worked tirelessly to transform the plaza into a full-scale medical center. Their successful treatment of transformation casualties attracted attention from across the galaxy, and soon other medical teams were arriving to learn the new techniques. The reversal procedure, which became known as the Chinvasker Protocol, was distributed to every human and Zephyrian medical facility in the Alliance. But it wasn't just the medical breakthrough that captured galactic attention. The story of a human medic and an ancient dragon working together to save an entire world spread rapidly through both military and civilian channels. For humans, it proved that their species could stand as equals alongside the most legendary beings in the galaxy. For Zephyrians, it validated their ancient belief that the war dragons would return when they were needed most. "You've become quite famous," Dr. Webb observed as he reviewed the latest casualty statistics. "The entire Alliance command structure is talking about you too." Sarah looked up at Vasker, who was resting nearby, but listening to their conversation through their bond. "We didn't do this for fame. We did it because it needed to be done." Nevertheless, Vasker's mental voice carried amusement. "It appears we have become symbols of something larger than ourselves. The galaxy has taken notice of what humans and dragons can accomplish together." That evening, as Sarah stood on the steps of their newly established medical center, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that day on Kepler 442b when she had first encountered a wounded dragon. She was no longer just a field medic. She was part of something unprecedented, a partnership that had already changed the course of a war and would likely influence galactic civilization for generations to come. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked Vasker through their bond. "Choosing to bond with a human instead of one of your own people?" "Never," the dragon replied without hesitation. "You showed me that loneliness is not the inevitable fate of the last of one's kind. Through our bond, I have learned that family is not just about shared blood or species. It is about shared purpose, mutual respect, and the willingness to sacrifice for others." Sarah smiled, feeling the deep affection and respect that flowed through their connection. "What happens next?" "Next," Vasker said, "we continue to do what we do best. We heal the wounded, protect the innocent, and show the galaxy that the Age of Dragons is not over. It has simply evolved." Above them, the stars of Haven's Rest wheeled through their ancient patterns, and in medical facilities across the galaxy, healers were learning new techniques that would save countless lives. The war with the hegemony was far from over, but The Alliance forces now had weapons more powerful than any military technology. Hope, partnership, and the unbreakable bond between a human medic who refused to give up on life and an ancient dragon who had found new purpose in an old calling. The galaxy would never be the same, and neither would the definition of what it meant to be a hero. In the years that followed, the story of Sarah Chun and Vasker the Eternal will be told across thousands of worlds. Some versions focused on the medical breakthrough that saved millions of lives. Others emphasized the military victories that turned the tide of the war. But all of them captured the essential truth that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from standing alone, but from finding someone who will stand with you, no matter what challenges may come. The human medic and the dragon had become more than just partners. They had become a legend. And legends, as any storyteller knows, have a way of inspiring others to reach for the impossible.